All parts. Let's get started. Okay, let me have your attention. Let's get started. Welcome to the University of Tennessee Nuclear Engineering Department Colloquium Program. My name is Lee Dodds. It's my privilege to introduce today's speaker, who is Dr. Donald Fingleton, who is with the U.S. Department of Energy Counterintelligence Training Academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Don received his Ph.D. in chemistry from the University of Michigan in 1988, and he did a B.S., the other end of the state, from Michigan State in 1972. And in between 72 and 88, he had an interesting academic career because he obtained 4 MS degrees. In 1975, he got an MS from Western Michigan, and then in 76, an MS in mechanical engineering from the University of Wisconsin. He said he did the Big Ten tour. And then an MS from the University of Michigan in atmospheric science in 1978, and another one in 1978 from Michigan in industrial hygiene. And after his distinguished academic career, he went to work at Argonne National Laboratory in 1980, and he was at Argonne from 1980 to 91, and then he became an academic. He couldn't stand being away from the academic environment. He returned to the academic environment, namely the New Mexico State University, where he was on the faculty from 1991 to the year 2001. And now, since 2001, he has been with the U.S. Department of Energy in his current capacity. The title of his presentation today is Conducting Research in a Threat Environment. Reducing the risk of exploitation by terrorist and foreign intelligence organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Donald Fingleton.
Well, thanks very much. I'm really happy to be here. And coming from Albuquerque, it's really pleasant to come to an environment that has high humidity, clouds. Ran into some rain last night coming across the mountains, so that's really something we don't see very often in New Mexico. Well, today we're going to talk about how we're exploited by others who would like to degrade our programs or maybe steal our technology. It's happening all the time. We haven't gotten any kind of benefit by the end of the Cold War in terms of the reduction in collection activities by various organizations that would either like to hurt us from a national security standpoint or hurt us from an economic standpoint. What we want to talk about is identify some of the foreign threats, who the threats are, discuss personal vulnerabilities, because one way we can combat this is by really looking inside of ourselves at our own vulnerabilities, because we really can't change the threat much. This is something that's inherent in organizations, people, nations. We don't have much control over that, and what we can do is control our own vulnerabilities, whether they're physical guards and gates and guns and things for our facilities, or things that we do ourselves that make us more susceptible to exploitation. We want to discuss the role of counterintelligence within this whole process, draw some similarities between counterintelligence, what we do in the counterintelligence, and what I did and you do in the scientific avenue, and also talk a little bit about, I'd like to lay the groundwork for talking to you about how can we collaborate, how can we work together, because the role of counterintelligence is not to get in the way of collaboration, is not to stop interacting with others, because we know these things have to occur. If they don't, our science and technology is going to die. 40–50% of the PhD graduates in this country year after year are foreign nationals. 400,000 PhDs in the workforce are foreign nationals. We rely on these people to help us building our technology. And so the idea is not to stop those interactions or that these people are bad. It's to try to conduct these interactions in a manner that's safe and reduces the risk of exploitation. Because as much as we hate to think about it, there are people out there that would like to hurt us. And whether it's from an identity theft standpoint of a common criminal, or whether it's a foreign country or terrorist organization coming in and trying to hurt us. Ally, adversary, or competitor. You know, it's really difficult these days to figure out who fits into what category. And I mean, if you look at any country at any point in time, they fit into all three of these categories simultaneously. Is that we have our typical adversaries that we've looked at for years in terms of the Cold War, whether it's the Soviet Union, Russia, the former, the newly free states, China, or North Korea, these others. But in fact, many of these countries are also our allies. Together, they're also competitors in the economic market. One of the things I'd like to show is a short video. It's Oleg Kalugin. He was a major general in the Soviet KGB. He ran counterintelligence operations in this country for many years. He came over as a young undercover agent, as a journalist. He was a Fulbright scholar at Columbia University. He was a correspondent at the UN and chief of internal security, which finally got him out of the spy business and security business, because after the end of the Cold War, he went back to Moscow, and they wanted him to start spying on his fellow mates back in his country, and he found that objectionable. It was fine to come over here and spy on us, but he didn't want to do that on his mates back home. So he emigrated to the U.S. He's become a U.S. citizen and actually works for us a lot in terms of coming out and giving briefings. Really fascinating guy.
Меня зовут Олег Калугин. Как генерал-майор КГБ, I was responsible for foreign counterintelligence for the KGB worldwide. In this position, I was responsible for all agent operations directed against the United States. Let me assure you of one thing. As an employee of this facility, you were targeted for recruitment. It did not matter if you were a scientist, a technical staff member, or an administrative assistant. It did not matter if you had access to classified information or not. You were a potential target. The fact that you were employed by this organization meant that you had or would have access to sensitive information, or to others who had access to sensitive information that would help my country. Make no mistake about it. You were and are a potential target for recruitment. Recruitment can be a long process, encompassing several weeks or months. My successors are patient people. They have time and they will wait. For some of you, they will develop that long-standing relationship needed to establish your need or dependency on them. At that point, they will have you and you will feel obligated to help. For others, you'll be approached during a conference, seminar, or meeting held overseas or right here in the United States. If we are subtle, you may never know of our approach, but it will happen. The bottom line is you don't need to be paranoid, but you need to be aware at all times that the intelligence services know who you are and are interested in you as a potential recruitment.
I think the important points to take away from this short video is, for one thing, you don't need to be paranoid. You don't need to be looking over your shoulder. We're not looking for everybody to become a counterintelligence officer and be sneaking around and be leery of everybody that you come in contact to. What we're trying to do, though, is raise your level of awareness that there are these activities that continue to go on. They go on all the time. We have reporting continuously about these things. And so just be aware that it does go on, and it's something that perhaps I know from my own personal standpoint, I don't like to be used or manipulated. You know, it makes me cranky to have people do that. And I'm not looking around all corners or everything, but there are some things that have happened throughout time that make me feel uncomfortable. And so maybe I don't share so much information with people. I know, anybody travel, been on an airplane? Have you ever learned more than you ever wanted to learn about somebody on an airplane? I mean, it's really amazing how much information people will share or we will share with people that we have no idea who they are. We've never seen them before in our lives. And they have the ability to find out a lot about us, and they make opportunities available to come and meet you. As I said, espionage activities continue. Here's a rogues gallery of a number of people that have been either admitted to committing espionage or industrial espionage, or have been convicted in one way or another. And they come from a variety of areas. This gentleman here was a life sciences researcher at the Cleveland Clinic. He ended up working on Alzheimer's disease issues, ended up sending all of his cell lines that he was developing back to the Riken Institute in Japan, and then went over there and took a job. He destroyed all of the research that he and his group and others had been working on back at the Cleveland Clinic, so it left them without anything, and also involved a rather innocent colleague at the University of Kansas that ended up holding the cell lines while the guy was making some other arrangements. He's currently in Japan. We've tried to extradite him to bring him back here and prosecute him, and Japan's refused to send him out. Bob Hansen, we probably all heard about. This was a retired Air Force guy. This guy was from the Immigration Naturalization Service. The lady in the upper right-hand corner was with the Defense Intelligence Agency. And one thing we're noticing now is back 10, 15, 20 years ago, all the people that we caught spying were typically young male Caucasians. Well, it's becoming a more diversified field in terms of who's doing the espionage, and this is a group here. Maybe you haven't heard much about it on the East Coast. Katrina Leung, she was a Republican fundraiser socialite in L.A. that had been. J.J. Smith was a FBI China counterintelligence expert that had Katrina as his asset that was supposedly providing information from China to him for the FBI. He ended up having a 20-some-year affair with the lady, which is not a good thing to do if you're a Chinese counterintelligence guy with the FBI. This was another former FBI agent, China expert. Both of them spoke various Chinese dialects fluently. Bill Cleveland ended up being head of counterintelligence and security at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. While J.J. was carrying on an affair with her, Bill Cleveland also had a 10, 15-year affair with the lady. And the interesting thing about this case, and it's irrelevant whether they gave up classified information or not, some of this is still being adjudicated, but here are two guys who are expert in Chinese counterintelligence that still couldn't manage the risk associated with these kinds of relationships. And so I think what it shows is that no matter how smart you are, how much expertise you have, there are ways that you can fall into these traps. And I know from my own personal experience, women that are significantly younger than me are a problem, vulnerability. I'm single, by the way. These guys were married, so that makes it a little less. But anyway, foreign intelligence services remain to be a threat. They continue to pose a problem, collecting both from a political and economic standpoint. They're also looking for science and technology. They're certainly still interested in our military capabilities and what we're going to do. But there's also a whole other group of people that also pose threats that are coming in. They're trying to collect information on us, on our programs, and whether it's to use us to hurt us physically or to take trade secrets or steal our identities. There's a lot of different areas that they're working in, and there's a lot of different groups that pose a threat to us. And really all countries are interested in U.S. technology. And this is each year the Defense Security Service does a study where they're looking at the number of reported events that they've had of espionage collection activities that are going on, and what is the source of this activity, where is the targeting coming from. And this shows that areas that we typically worry about in China and Russia, there's a fair amount of activity. There's no surprise there. But there are a bunch of places where, from my standpoint, I don't really think about posing a threat. Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, North America, Australia. There's a significant amount of activity occurring from these venues. And so it's not just a couple countries that we need to be worried about, is that the activity is coming from all over the globe. Some places, some areas are much more prevalent than others, but they still pose some sort of a threat. And of course, the humans are the weakest link in the whole process. We're the easiest to be manipulated. We can spend billions of dollars on hardware, software, gates and guns and everything, but if you are able to corrupt or to get into one person, that's all you need to be able to defeat all of those systems. We tend to have a false sense of security. We think that it's always going to happen to somebody else, and actually it doesn't always happen to somebody else because it happens to somebody. We're naive and we're somewhat gullible, and we really don't perceive there's much of a threat. Who's going to do this? Why would they seek me? I don't work on any classified programs. I don't do anything. Well, my whole research career, I never had a classified program. I never had a clearance, yet I ended up being targeted anyway and exploited for a variety of reasons. It probably didn't compromise national security in any way because I wasn't really impacted by that. But I was used to gain access to other people, other places, and it was because of some political contacts that I had that people had interest in me. And the methods try to target things that are natural tendencies especially within American culture. We're typically trusting. If somebody comes up to us and, for example, if I was at a conference and they said they were Dr. So-and-so from whatever university, I wouldn't have no reason to question that or to think that they might have something other than talking about science. But this, in fact, actually does occur. We figure people are honest. Why do they have any reason to misrepresent themselves? We're typically polite and helpful. Anybody from Boston area, New England here? I used to think that was always true until I spent 2 years in Boston, and then I started questioning whether everybody, that was a universal trait. We're curious and we're somewhat careless, and especially as time goes along when we're in a position, we get much more careless. In one lifetime, I was an industrial hygienist and doing some consulting while I was still in graduate school. But I did some work at a General Motors manufacturing plant in Michigan. And it was never the new employees that got their fingers lopped off in a press. It was always the people that were 20-year workers that had done the same routine job time and time again, and then they got careless. They didn't follow procedures. They didn't do what they normally should be doing, and so they ended up losing fingers, hands, and arms. Now we're going to talk a little bit about vulnerabilities, and I'm going to do this through a method of somewhat embarrassing self-disclosure, basically a case study of what happened to me back in the mid-90s. And it was a USAID-sponsored program that we had. We hosted 3 delegations of Russian physicians and epidemiologists that came over for anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks at a time for each delegation. We took them to DOE and headquarters. We visited the EPA. They came to New Mexico. They visited the university. I was director of a research center at that time. They come and spend some time with me. And then we, of course, took them around to Sandia National Lab and Los Alamos National Lab for visits as well. For me, being single is a vulnerability. I'm susceptible to any ploy that well, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's 20 or 30 years younger than me. I'm vulnerable. My age span is maybe 40, 50 years, I guess. What did I say, you know? Drinking and eating is another vulnerability. And when we go out and we get into these situations, certainly our defense mechanisms are degraded. We start building relationships. We become friends with these people. And the one thing I want to point out is one thing that we typically talk about is, especially in foreign travel, is you want to work on a buddy system. You need to be traveling with a friend. When you get isolated, you can be abused much more easily and be compromised. Well, there isn't a picture I'm going to show you in this series here that has any more than one American in it. And you might guess who that one American was. Parties are another issue. This particular case, there were some that were in Washington, D.C., other ones that occurred in Moscow and Ekaterinburg. And then, of course, there are other behaviors where one's imagination can run wild about the types of activities that could be going on. We've actually documented through pictures 13 people in, this was a jacuzzi in my bedroom designed for 2, but we were able to cram a few more vodka drinkers in there than that. And then close and continuing relationships. I ended up having a 2-year relationship with one of the interpreters that was with the group. And it was all through these series of things. There was a variety of ways that I was exploited over this between 1994 and 1996 time frame. Did it compromise national security? Probably not. But, you know, I don't really feel great about being exploited. There are some things that went on that probably were not good things and might have compromised national security. So the thing is that what I do now, I still have these vulnerabilities. There's no doubt about it. I like to go to parties. I like, well, I don't need to elaborate on what else I like, but anyway, is what I've done over the years, though, and especially in the last 7 to 10 years that I've been in a national security venue, is that I've learned to manage the risk associated with those vulnerabilities. I pick and choose the places that I will partake in this kind of activity, primarily in the privacy of my own home by myself, rather than in groups of totally unknown people in a foreign country. And it never, ever occurred to me over all this time that anybody would want anything from me or would be my friend other than the fact that I was charming and interesting and fun to talk to. But, you know, it's amazing how easily you can be overwhelmed with your own power of persuasion in these kinds of situations. And we have, it's absolutely astounding how many middle-aged DOE National Lab employees we've had that have been detailed to various countries that have come home with, well, and it's not just the men, it's the women as well that have come home with spouses from these countries. And the circumstances upon which those occur are sometimes questionable. And what counterintelligence is here for, what we're trying to do is really help you manage the risk. As I said in the beginning, is that we're really not here to get in the way of what you're doing or of interactions going on. What we'd like to do is to make you aware of some of the techniques that are used, and so if this happens to you or you see it occurring, whether you're on travel, at a conference, or in your daily life, that maybe you'll step back. And maybe it's not a foreign intelligence person pinging on you or trying to recruit you, as Kalugin talks about, but maybe it's somebody who's trying to steal your identity and wants to take your credit card numbers and go away. And really, if you protect, and the banks are doing a great job. I think their commercials are fantastic, the ones they have talking about identity theft issues, and it's certainly a problem. And if you protect your own identity, those are things that actually help us out in the long run. because the less people know about you in these kinds of situations, the better it is. And we want to do more than just tell you, be careful. You know, we want to be here to give you some information, whether if you're traveling, there may be terrorist threats and other types of threats, things that are going on in customs. We can provide you that information before you go, so you're not caught cold in a situation where something happens at customs and you're being harassed wherever you are. If we can provide you that information ahead of time, you might be aware. Look at what the transportation's PSA folks are doing. They're telling you, don't be carrying this stuff. Pack light. If you're going to be carrying stuff on board an airplane, make it be simple for us, because then you're not going to be dragged off to the side. And that's the similar kinds of things that we can help you with when you do traveling. So what is counterintelligence? Well, what we're really here to do is to collect information or conduct activities that can help protect against espionage and other types of activities, sabotage and assassinations. Well, sabotage and assassinations probably aren't a real big area, but certainly sabotage goes along with the terrorist threat that we now see. And again, the espionage activities continue to date. And it's not, counterintelligence is not what you see when you're sitting at the diner and you have somebody smart serving you the breakfast in the morning. And so what is it with the counterintelligence people? Well, I'd like to say is that we're not horrible monsters like depicted on here and what people's opinion might be of counterintelligence. And actually these folks are well-educated, motivated, driven people. They're focused, they're very disciplined in what they do, and they have a lot of experience in doing what they do. The other thing is that we're charged with looking out for the whole DOE, National Nuclear Security Administration complex. There's the breadth of science that's conducted within DOE and our academic partners is just absolutely astounding. There's no way in the world that we, even if you got 4 master's degrees or 6 degrees, can be aware of all the applications and the other things that we can do in these disciplines. And so it's very difficult for us to follow that. We need your help in trying to understand a little bit more about what you do and what the applications of what you do might be, and whether there might be any concerns. The scientific method, what do? We have a problem, we go out and we collect some data, we review the literature, we look at historical information, we design some studies, we conduct the research, we analyze the data, and then we go out and publish it, and we have our peer reviewers come back and hammer us, and we make adjustments to what we're doing. Well, it's not really all that different from counterintelligence or intelligence gathering. Is that essentially you have planning and direction. It's like identifying gaps in information in our scientific information that we need to fill in. We set out a plan to go out and collect the information we need. We process and analyze the data. We write it up and we disseminate it, and it goes back to the consumers, the people, policymakers, and others who really are the decision makers of what to do. Well, and that's our sort of our peer review group. So the process is not all that much different from conducting science. And of course, our peer review group, and if we get in on the legal side, is a jury, and we provide the results of our research to a jury, and they make the ruling as to whether we've done a good job or not. Sometimes that can be a lot more difficult to deal with than a peer review panel. And the local counterintelligence office is really a resource for you. We can provide you, first thing is we identify threats and possible risks to our programs, but we also have ways of trying to help reduce that risk, and that's through education and training, trying to do little awareness briefings like this. And all we want to do, in my view, is all we need to do is raise awareness just a little bit, because it'll make a big difference in protecting DOE assets or your research assets, your intellectual property, trade secrets, and other things. And one story in terms of a little bit of awareness. When I first moved to Albuquerque, I met some people that were a young couple that were buying duplexes, fourplexes, renovating them, and then renting them out. And they were somewhat aware of the types of things I was doing these days, and I happened to call them up one night when I got back from a trip. And the lady says, geez, you know, it's amazing you call, because I just got a call today, and it was from a Middle Eastern sounding guy from Detroit that wanted to rent one of our units for a week. And she says, well, I heard on 60 Minutes last week that there's the largest Middle Eastern community, Arab community outside the Middle East is in Detroit, that many of these groups were known to be funneling money to the terrorist organizations. And she says, well, what do you think? I said, well, forget about the Middle Eastern accent or that sort of stuff. Was there anything really strange about this request? She said, well, sure. We have 1-2-year leases on our properties. If you want to stay someplace for a week, you go to extended stay, you go to Holiday Inn or someplace like that. And I said, okay, well, and so I gave her the name of one of the local FBI agents, and she called, and I checked back a couple days later, and the agent was thrilled to hear from her. For one thing, is she had callback numbers and a lot of other information that typically when they get a referral, they wouldn't have. And whether the guy thought she was just some dumb rental agent or whatever and wouldn't think twice about it, I don't know. But they provided a lot of information. Well, it wasn't too long after that, maybe 6 months, it came out in the open press that, in fact, Al-Qaeda, one of their plans, the plans that they found when they were rooting through the caves in Afghanistan, was to come to this country, rent apartment complexes, load up apartments with explosives, and then remotely detonate them. Now, I don't know if that's where this particular situation led down the line, but certainly it was in their planning book to do these kinds of things, and that's where, again, where a little bit of awareness might have saved some lives. Because she heard some things on TV. When the hair on the back of her neck stood up for whatever reason, she went and talked to somebody she thought might have known a little bit more than she did about the subject. And one thing that we do oftentimes is we see things that look out of the ordinary. We don't understand why they're going on or why that particular person is doing it, but we rationalize our way out of not taking an active role in either questioning the person or informing somebody else that we've observed this, because we don't want to get involved, or it can't possibly be as crazy as we think it is. And I know even myself in the organization and the area that I work in, is it's very hard to stop somebody when we have to wear badges. And if somebody doesn't have a badge, it's our duty to stop them and quiz them why they don't have a badge. But it's really outside our character to do that and challenge people in a hallway. But it's, especially in our environment, that's something that we need to do. You're critical to our success. You know, there's way over 200,000 employees within the DOE complex, including our academic partners. There's maybe 120 counterintelligence officers within the whole complex. Now, that's not a real favorable CI officer to employee ratio. It's not dissimilar from the one I had in calculus at Michigan State University, but nonetheless, it wasn't a good thing there either. And the thing is that today we have multiple threats and multiple targets. There's a lot of things that people are looking for to try to compromise us. And so what can you do? Well, the main thing is be aware. Be aware of your surroundings, and it really helps from a terrorism standpoint too, as there's a lot of things that went on with the 9/11 people that folks might have picked up on, and they look at it in retrospect and you go, well, yeah, geez, I thought that was strange, but you know, we didn't think much about it at the time. We need to be more aware of our surroundings. Just walking down the streets at night and being aware of who's behind you when you're getting in your vehicle. I mean, there are multiple threats out there that we need to be worried about. You don't need to be paranoid. Be aware that there are possible threats. Believe that they are, because the best way we can get into trouble is to think that there isn't anybody that's out there that's looking to harm us in some way. And then the other thing is to assess your own personal vulnerabilities. Perhaps not doing it retrospectively like I have, and looking back over my life and look at all of the risky behaviors that I've partaken in over the years, but maybe do it in a prospective manner. And most of all, report suspicious behavior. If you see something out of the ordinary, and it doesn't necessarily, I mean, we would like for you to come call counterintelligence and talk to the folks, but, you know, just talking to somebody else, whether it's the maid in your office or your department head or somebody else, and say, geez, you know, I saw this, what do you think about it? It really goes a long way in towards helping us, instead of having it be something that falls by the wayside. And the thing you have to understand, too, is that what we see as individuals out there is one piece of information. And we look at it as being insignificant when we see it from that. But from our standpoint, we're getting reporting in from a lot of areas. And that one piece of what seems to be somewhat insignificant really oftentimes will fit into a pattern of activity that we see. And we don't need to have the whole picture to put the puzzle together. Same way with the other side, is they don't need to have the whole technical manual for a nuclear weapon to be able to build one. They need little bits and pieces of information. They have talented people in these other places too. They can figure it out. They just don't have the money and the resources to put in it that we did. Well, how can we collaborate? I don't think we have probably the time here to deal with this, but that's one of the things we would like to hear from the scientific community, is how can we help you get your job done, do it in a manner that's safe and efficient without compromising the research that you're doing, but also at the same time not compromising your health and well-being either. So we talked a little bit about threats. We talked about the role of counterintelligence in trying to help manage the risk associated with those threats. Talked a little bit of vulnerabilities, mostly mine, not yours, but you know, you might get an idea of what the categories of things that fit in terms of stuff that these folks are trained to look at, evaluate, and exploit. They will play whatever role they need to play to get in to be your best friend. We identified some similarities between counterintelligence and the scientific community. I'd like to get to the point to where we don't see ourselves on opposite sides of the planet, but actually we're working towards the same types of goals. And then we would really like to elicit your ideas on how we can collaborate. Chris Marcellus is the senior counterintelligence officer, for Oak Ridge National Lab. He would be a point of contact. Polly is a counterintelligence officer as well. We have some flyers up here with some contact information. But I think, you know, what I'd like to hear from you, if you have any ideas of what we can do, can we do anything to make our relationship be more cooperatively? Again, when I was an industrial hygienist, I was a consultant, so I was going in, programs and projects were already shut down. They had a problem. So I was coming in as the savior. The problem is the corporate hygienist people were the ones that shut down the program because there was some kind of safety problem. Well, everybody hates the corporate hygienists because they're perceived as getting in the way of doing my work, doing my job. They're shutting down the program. They're costing me money. And I see counterintelligence oftentimes being viewed in the same manner, is that these are the people, they come around, all they're going to do is cause me problems. And really, we're not there to do that. We're there to try to help you and do it in a way. And that some of the things we do are not totally arbitrary. We're not trying to throw an umbrella over or a tarp over everything that's going on, because we understand that these interactions have to occur. And, of course, if you guys go out of business, so do we. So it's sort of a job-saving aspect, too, that you continue doing what you do. But we actually go out and we look at threats. We evaluate them. We don't treat everything the same way. We put because we have limited resources, we want to put those resources in the area that give us the most, reduce the risk the most. And so that's an area also that you can help us with, is to tell us about what some of these projects are that are going on and whether anybody might be, how they can be used in other ways that we maybe need to be worried about.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, we do have time for questions and comments. Okay, I'll ask the first question when you think about questions and comments. Okay. You said we should not be paranoid, and I understand and I agree with that. But can you give us some guidelines on how to differentiate between some being a target for counterintelligence versus genuine friendship and genuine colleagueship? I just returned from a trip to Taiwan and China, and I must have met 100 new people.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I'm concerned, they're all friends and colleagues. And so, and I'm going to treat them that way, unless you give me some guidelines and some pointers on how to treat them otherwise.
Well, I think it's unfortunately, it's a continuum. You know, relationships are a continuum. They're not digital type things. We can't give you a checklist that you can easily, well, if they have this attribute, that, and the other one, that, well, that puts them in this category, so they're not going to be my friends. We try to look at that in terms of studies have been done on people who have been convicted of conducting espionage. And so we try to look at what precursors for committing espionage are. And of course, financial issues are always up front in terms of people making the decision to betray their country. But even if you have the whole list of attributes, it doesn't make you be a spy. You know, I think it's kind of like the case they're making with this Peterson guy out in California. The defense keeps saying, well, yeah, he's a cat and he's a nasty guy and everything. Doesn't necessarily make him a murderer because he has all these horrible attributes. And it's the same way here. And so these are very subjective decisions that you have to make. I think the important thing is to actually believe that there is a threat, that there is a small percentage of the people that you may come in contact with that may want to exploit you. And when the questioning goes down certain pathways and maybe they want to find out too much personal information about you or use you as a springboard to move into other areas, talk about other types of activities, it's not easy. And in fact, if I went back and relived what went on with the Russians now, it would be very hard for me to pick out somebody that might have been trying to exploit me. Although it should have been apparent that a beautiful, fit woman 30 years younger than me might have not just been interested in me.
I didn't have that problem. Okay, do we have other questions and comments for our speakers? Mary?
Well, it seems to me, Don, that we face some unique challenges today that we may not have had 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that is with the advent of the Internet and everything we're doing here today. From my own experience, being a government manager and executive for 20-some years and stuff like that, doing a lot of international programs and stuff like that, I sense with the Internet, the great thing that it was, we've lost a big measure of control. I mean, they were gaining access to information that I wasn't even aware that they were gaining access to.
Well, and the other thing, too, is that it is so easy. In the past, in my life in the national labs, if somebody was seeking a report or a publication that we had, they went to the technical information group at the lab, and they responded to all requests. We never did it individually. Now, we all get individual requests for information, and we respond to them. And I know from my own standpoint, in fact, unsolicited requests for information is the largest category It's about 40–50% of the targeting that goes on in the Defense Department laboratories that we're seeing. And it's because it's so easy. It's anonymous. You can put on that email whatever you want and whoever you want to be, and you have no idea. The other thing is what the address is on that is easily changed to be coming from anywhere. You could send it from Russia, but it will look like it comes from Georgia or Tennessee. And so you don't know, and unless you're really into the forensics end of it, you wouldn't be able to determine that. And it's very easy to do that. Before I left the university, I was at an ag school. I believe this is an ag school too. Is that right?
Right.
So we had a big program going on. I was trying to get them interested in agricultural terrorism. Thought it was a reasonable thing. This was about 1998, 99 time frame. University didn't want anything to do with it. They thought that the ranchers and the farmers in the area would probably shoot them if they got interested in those types of things. Their attitudes changed now. But the thing is that I gave a paper at a AAAS meeting. I'd written some other things and did presentations. Well, anything at a AAAS meeting, it ends up being posted on the website. So I had my name, my affiliation, all my contact information. It was stunning how many unsolicited emails I got from all over the world asking me very detailed questions about what systems would you attack? Would it be plants, animals? If you were doing plants, would it be grains? What agents would you use? How much would you have to use? These are things, in a past lifetime, anybody asked me anything about what kind of research I was doing, and if I had anything I could send them, boom, it was out in a millisecond. And I was so thrilled that somebody from a foreign country was even aware of anything I was doing, much less that they were interested enough to listen to me, invite me to come to their country and give a presentation on the subject. And that's just not a good thing to do. These presentations were unclassified. But, I kind of aggregated a lot of stuff. It's not, if they want to go out and do the research, they could do the same thing that I did. But I don't necessarily need to be providing them that aggregated information to enable them to go out and either be a vandal in this country or be a terrorist, a terrorist sponsored by an organization. Other things that I had, after 9/11, I'd already moved to the counterintelligence side, but I got a call back in my home department at New Mexico State University, and it was a lady who represented herself as being a writer for the American Association for Civil Engineers. Now, these folks are, you probably already know this, but they not only build highways and probably concrete boats, but they also do wastewater treatment issues. And so she gave the administrative person the kinds of information she was interested in. And so that was transferred to me up to Albuquerque, and it was things about could you contaminate a groundwater supply or a reservoir? How much material would you need? Would you have to drive tankers up and dump it into a reservoir to get the concentrations high enough? Would water treatment plants take care of that? Would that scrub it all out so it wouldn't be a problem? And even if if it was contaminated, that the people wouldn't be affected anyway. Well, those are information you can find on the internet, doing a literature search. You could probably figure it out. Wouldn't take a whole lot of talent. I'm not going to feed anybody, but what I did is I thought, well, this is really interesting. I need to know who I'm talking to. So I called up the society, and I said, well, do you have so-and-so working here? Gave the name and the contact information. They never heard of her. She was not who she represented herself to be. I don't know who she was, but it might have been somebody out there just trolling for information, trying to figure out how would we do this. And those are the kinds of things that again, maybe 15 years ago, I wouldn't have thought twice about, and would have got up and given a whole lecture on this. But now, and I think all of us understand that certainly terrorism is a threat. It's not going to go away anywhere anytime soon. And maybe verifying, in some instances, who we are talking to when they're asking questions that make us uneasy.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Yes,
I
sir.
want to ask you, like, some people are calling me for, to get change, like phone company, you know, and then they start speaking Arabic to me because they're from my name. And then I told them, no, I'm not interested because I'm with Bell South and I just want to continue with Bell South. So they kept on calling me for over like 2 or 3 months. And then I said, okay, I'll eventually we try to do the change for 1 month. And then I realized when I was talking to him, he told me, give me your address, which, and then he said, what is your birthday? I gave it to him, and then he asked, what is your social security
Ouch.
number? And then when he asked me for the social security number, I was really alarmed.
You
What
could
he
have been.
did is, and he said, well, Bell South asked for these things because I put a block on my Bell South so the companies cannot change it.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems as though he tried to change it for me. You know what I mean? Like he asked Bell South or something. So he got this information, and he wanted me to give him more information about myself. Like, what was worrying me is that what should I do in this case? Because he got like my birthday, but he didn't get my social security number, and I'm not sure how much he can do with my birthday. You know what I mean?
Well, you can do a lot. It's a gateway into something else. If you have birth date and some of that kind of information, you can go out and apply for credit cards. It could be an identity theft scam. It could be something else.
Yeah,
There's a lot of these things that are going on, and a lot of it is coming over the internet too, of getting people. And that's a wonderful thing about the internet, is with one punch of the key, you can send out to 10,000 people. You don't need a lot of returns. You only need one person to fall for your scam.
Yeah, but like, what do you do on personal level? You know, if I go to the police and I said this, I can try to do star 69 to find out who and it was on, you know, like say you cannot trace it, call it. So what do you do? I mean, you don't want to kind of get paranoid all the time. You know? It's just kind of bizarre. You know, if I go to the police and I say like somebody asked me for my birthday, they're going to laugh at me. You know what I mean?
No, and
Are they going to put like all this effort? And me being from the Middle East also makes it more complicated.
No, and in fact, one of the techniques that's very effective that wasn't really used in the Cold War days so much, but is much more prevalent now because we have more people coming in, is ethnic targeting. You know, I mean, that's a real hot button from our standpoint. We get accused of it, or law enforcement does. But, you know, the foreign intelligence agencies really do that. They look for whether there are religious similarities, cultural similarities, whatever kinds of similarities they can, because now all of a sudden you have a link with them. Talking to you in Arabic is a perfect way of getting you in. Well, I'm one of you.
Yeah,
you know?
The strange thing is that when he talked to me, he said, talk to my supervisor, and his supervisor also spoke Arabic. For me, I thought like he's an Arab guy working in an American company, and his supervisor would be American. But his supervisor was also Arab, which is kind of made it really strange.
No, and those are things, you know, even though local law enforcement might not be interested in it, Poly might be interested in it, because it's something, you know, it sounds to me like some sort of a scam type thing, for one thing. And the more we can get that kind of information out, these are tactics that they're using, the better we can inoculate ourselves against those types of activities. One of the things that's going around now, people can make their web links or emails look like whoever they want to look like. At General Atomics in California, they got attacked, and they got a message from Microsoft, and one of their scientists actually fell for it, and it said, if you have this particular file, search your computer, if you have this file, delete it. And in fact, you better do it right now, because the virus is set to be released in the next 12 hours or something. Well, one of the tactics they use, they try to get us excited. So what it does is it disrupts our thought processes. We need to make a decision now. We can't sit back and think about it and analyze it like we normally would, which would not lead us down the pathway of doing something without maybe calling our IT guy and asking him, is this reasonable? He deleted the file. Well, it was one of the things that controlled the fat part of it. So he lost his I think that's what it was. I'm not the cyber techie kind of guy. But he lost everything he had on his hard drive, plus it basically froze his computer. He couldn't use it anymore.
But it's just kind of weird because you don't know where the boundary is. Because this happened just 3 days ago. So I wasn't sure what to do.
Birth date, social security number should always send up flares, and you know. And the other thing is, and like I said about verifying, I went back to the association, tried to verify who this person is. Do callbacks. So, okay, give me your number. I'll call you back.
I can send you some information on how to report that in a specific way.
Okay.
I'll talk to you afterwards.
Okay, because you don't know what is the scheme. Is it just a trivial thing like changing my belt sauce, or is it more complex? You know, like if it's just a question of belt sauce changing, then it's okay. I can say I lost $20, but if it's worse, you know what I mean? Because you don't know what they're going to do with that information.
Well, the fact is that none of these companies will ever ask you that over the telephone. They just won't do it. It's not part of anything they do, and so it's a red flag anytime you hear something like it.
You can do it by email too.
Yep, exactly, and they just don't do it that way. I get a lot of times people will call wanting me to donate money to some cause or another, and I say, okay, send me the literature. I'll read it. I'll decide, and I'll do my investigation. Send it back. Never will they ever do that. I mean, you don't know whether it's a scam. I have other people coming down voter registration stuff. And they've got the cards. You can go down to the county clerk's office, get these cards. You can put on a hat. You can make up some kind of ID. And you can go around in the neighborhood and register everybody to vote. So what do you give up? You give up your social security number, your birth date, your address, your mother's maiden name, all these sorts of things. These people may be legitimate, but, you know, frankly, I don't care. If they are legitimate, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to go down to the county clerk's office and do it, because I don't feel giving that information to a total stranger is reasonable activity. You know, so that's how I would handle it. And yeah, you don't know. It could be legitimate, highly unlikely, because they wouldn't be asking you that kind of information over the telephone.
Okay. I think that we will go downstairs now for our refreshments. I hope the refreshments are down there. I haven't checked. I assume they are. And we can continue the discussions with Don down there. But before we adjourn, let's express our appreciation again.
I did a 1-hour thing yesterday on social engineering, which gets into a lot of those aspects.
Got your hand up here.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.
I can either give you my card.
Okay, I can email you.
Yeah, that would work. I just can't remember.